welcome back to another edition of Old School MMA Review. Today we're taking a look back at more of the SEG UFC pay-per-views, starting with UFC 5, Return of the Beast. I am the fight nerd Matthew Kaplowitz, and on the other side of the screen is featured BloodyElbow.com writer Zane Simon. Zane, how are you today?
I'm doing good. Although I'm a little scared because I feel like I'm looking at the Beast or Hoary and Gracie.
Yeah, if I didn't have a tan, I'd probably look a lot less like Horny and more like Dan Severn. But yes, this is my gray sweatshirt and my Dan Severn mustache because I am the Beast, Dan Severn.
That's right. The fight beast, the nerd beast.
Nerd Beast, I like that. This mustache smells like Sharpie marker, so I'm gonna take it off now because I'm getting really high from the fumes. Wow, that was painful.
All right.
These are the expenses we go through.
It was painful for me too.
I'm sure it's painful for everybody who's watching this video. And so for viewers who are just tuning in now too, you may notice we have a different setup this time. We're attempting Google Plus and Google Hangouts to see how this records. We have heard your many vocal complaints about how our audio sucks ass, so we're finally fixing it.
Yes, all 5 of you who have watched have complained mightily, and we are listening. Never let it be said that we don't respond to our fans.
And we do. We love all of you, except for the ones that constantly call us names. You guys go fuck yourselves, but the rest of you guys are cool.
That's right. All the rest of you are cool. That one dude that said that you you looked like a mouse, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, it's okay. A little anti-Semitism is fine on the show. It's alright. That's right. We were here now to talk about UFC 5 as we continue down memory lane SEG UFC pay-per-views. And we're going to be starting here with this, again, big 8-man tournament. We got the first ever Superfight in UFC history. It's a pretty big card. It's a very different UFC from what we're used to seeing in a lot of ways, as we're going to see. And it kind of is a precursor to what we're going to see down the line for the next batch of UFCs. So a few quick numbers before we start getting into the discussion. The event was held April 7th, 1995, already in 95. Can you believe it? It's been 2 years already, essentially.
Yeah, it's really, the pacing on this is really weird. I was doing some stuff like going through and tracking them up through UFC 30, and suddenly I realized it was like 1999 or 2000, and it's UFC 30. It's just like, wow. And suddenly we're like a decade away, and we've had another 200 UFC events since then.
It's pretty nuts how quickly they started climbing the ladder in terms of numbers. Especially you keep in mind the first event was at the end of 1993, but even then, you guys will see very quickly that they add more and more events throughout the years. And obviously, here we are in 2013, where there's like an event every weekend, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, once again, we are back in North Carolina. We're here in Charlotte, North Carolina. No Ric Flair references this time. I think we killed that enough in the last video we did that with.
No, but this is pre-Carolina Panthers. We get a shout-out to the eventual idea that there might be a Carolina Panthers football team there.
That's true. I was confused by that. I'm not a football fan, so I was confused by that as well. I was like, Carolina Panthers? What? They don't exist? I don't know. So,
yeah, they didn't exist. That's how long ago this was, for all the weirdness. And did we get any ridiculous? I think we just got the Carolina Panthers was our ridiculous intro video of the day, because now they've started every one of them with some strange local attraction to point out. So
that's right. This time we had the Panthers. Although I thought the video itself opening up the show was actually not that bad. It was very quick and painless, which was also nice. It was just basically little graphics flying by the screen of past UFCs. That's what I had in mind.
I'm impressed that you could say you didn't think that I thought that was hilariously terrible. The whole like floating windows in space. It
was absolutely horrible. That's why I liked it. It was so it was so dated, even by then. But it just looked so cool. Like I actually liked it because it was just so bizarrely stupid and out of date that it really worked for how these old UFCs look.
Yeah, there's a very original PowerPoint presentation quality to the old UFC intros.
It's a nice MS Paint graphics. Those are always good.
Yeah, a few MS Paint graphics, UFC drawn in the squiggly lines and the default red that it always goes to.
Yes, and speaking of MS Paint, let's talk about the logo as well for UFC 5, because once again, the Ultimate Man, a.k.a. Who do we decide the Ultimate Man?
Monson.
Jeff Monson, a.k.a. Jeff Monson. He's now posing on top of a Roman numeral for 5, the V, just smashing his fist down in a tantrum.
Yeah, the hammer fist action going after the world there. Hammer fist style.
And to
So
be
maybe
fair,
that was
it's
Mark Coleman this time.
Yeah, I was gonna say it looks a lot more. Definitely someone smashing things. I thought it was definitely some kind of violent man smashing things down. I thought it was Jeff Munson, but Mark Coleman is a good thing too. Of course, neither man has done anything yet in the sport, but I guess whoever the graphic designers were, they were thinking to the future.
That's right. They knew that ripped bald dudes would be coming to lay the hammer down.
That's right, and a few quick numbers also before we jump into the show. Attendance this time around. This is, I believe, the biggest show they've had to date, with 6,000 people in attendance. That's a big jump from the last events they've had. I think the biggest before that was maybe like 2,800. Or there might have been 3,000.
Oh, and a couple other numbers. As we're right into the opening of the package, we get Jeff Blatnick telling us exactly how big the octagon is at 32 feet across with a 5-foot high chain link fence, standing on the very spot that Dan Severn submitted to Royce Gracie.
Yeah, I love that there. That was a pretty great thing. Once the show actually begins, we got our little intro of all the guys who are going to be with us for this event. And, of course, Jeff Blatnick, as always, he's the guy that's standing in the octagon to introduce, I guess we could say, the technical aspects of the show, if you want to give him that much credit. But, yeah, he was standing in the infamous spot somehow, even though it's a totally new mat, I would hope.
I would hope so, too.
And did you think they clean those mats in between, or did they just buy new ones?
Yeah, I think they buy new ones. I don't think any promotion has. I don't know if any promotion has ever used the same mat from event to event. That'd be a good question.
Oh well, I got some trivia. Actually, yes, there was World Series of Fighting.
Oh yeah. Well, I remember they had the wrong size mat.
That's correct, and they had to fly in the mat from the first event.
Oh, that's right.
That was all big debacle. I remember driving up there and continuously checking my iPhone to see if the event was even still on, because they didn't have a canvas at the time of the fight was supposed to start. This is hours before it was going to begin. So World Series of Fighting for sure did recycle their mats.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has. Even in the old UFC, I would hope that there was somebody in the backstage preparation saying, we really should not use these over and over again. Cut down on the whole gore slick look of it.
Gore slick is a very good word. And that's a perfect segue to lead me into my next point that I wanted to bring up. As we're mentioning the guys who are at the show here, we have Jeff Blatnick as part of the commentary team, and of course we also have now Bruce Beck as the main man behind the microphone. And his first comment that I wrote down, because it was pretty much perfectly encapsulated Bruce Beck and the UFC here, and he said, "This event is not for the faint of heart. It is brutal competition. There may be some blood spilled. There may be some bones broken. This is real. It's live. It's brutal." So he managed to say brutal twice in the span of about 5 seconds. Very impressive start.
Yeah. Bruce and I started noticing it here, and it comes up in a few events I've seen with him. He was really, I don't know, his level of his adjectives for MMA were a little on the blood and guts and oh my god, is this really happening right in front of me side of things.
And do you think it was more to sensationalize that at this point it is a blood sport, or was it more just because Bruce is kind of uncomfortable with this pseudo sport?
I think it was more uncomfortable with the pseudo sport. Maybe that changed over time. Maybe that isn't true. I definitely think, we'll get into more stuff later, but in this event it was probably more promo stuff, I would say. Yeah,
I would agree. He used that a lot. I mean, even that first opening line, that's pretty much like a perfect thing for a marketing to use. So we also had, as mentioned, joining us once again is also Jim Brown, who will say very little of consequence in this event. He gets kind of shut out, unfortunately, a lot because of Jeff Blatnick talking over him, which I guess we'll talk about also a little bit as we go on. And also returning, Dr. Richard Istrico is back, and Leon Tabbs, the Cup Man, is back. Making his return to the UFC, but not as an active fighter, is Ron Van Cleef.
That's right, and they had a lot to say about Ron Van Cleef, none of which was to mention that he'd ever fought in the UFC before or had ever lost in the UFC.
That's correct. His one single appearance in the UFC was at UFC 4. Again, a losing effort against Royce Gracie. He does have the distinction of being, at this point, the oldest man to have fought in the octagon, I believe, to date still. Not even Randy can carry yet.
And probably one of the most decorated black belts to ever fight in the UFC still. Although he'd be challenged in this event by the infamous John Dowdy.
Oh, yes.
also has a list of black belt accomplishments as long as my arm, and put up a martial arts showing of getting pasted for 2 minutes.
It's also interesting to know too. Van Cleef being the commissioner now of the IFC, and not let's be very clear. He's actually the commissioner of the IFC, which was the original sanctioning body of the UFC events. It was essentially their own internal sanctioning body for people who don't know what the IFC was. Very short-lived, but it's what had begun to create the rules of MMA, which, as we'll go over right now, in fact, I'll do that right now. There are some rules, once again, for this UFC, even though there usually are no rules. And we have no biting, no eye gouging, no rounds, but here's a new rule because of what happened at UFC 4 with the Severn Gracie match going over 16 minutes. The quarter and semifinal fights will now be 20 minutes long, and the finals and Superfight will be 30. No round breaks, just one continuous fight, and there is a potential of an overtime round if needed.
Yeah, and they adjust, and that would get adjusted pretty quick after this event too. So,
yeah.
Spoiler alert: that the time becomes a very shifting problem that they have to deal with. They're realizing very quickly that the excitement of the no rules, no limit fights is changing as you start to encounter fights that nobody wants to watch.
Yes, definitely a big problem that we're going to see here and unfold a little bit more at the next event also. More so here, although we were lucky that most of the fights actually were very palatable and short, except for just one horrible, horrible fight that we'll get to. I guess let's preview that right now, though.
But we have a couple more rules to mention, 2 more. On the rule and they're the unspoken rules, which are no hand wraps, no gloves, and no shoes if you want to kick.
That's right. Those are the unofficial, unspoken rules. I don't know why they weren't actually made. I guess obviously they weren't made public because they just kind of take away from the actual action.
Yeah, they take away from the actual action, but they were the actual rules. I mean, cause everything else was a guideline. It was like no biting, no eye gouging, unless you do it, at which point, Although this will actually, this event too changes that. So
true.
But yeah, so the other rules: no shoes, no gloves.
So as usual, there are no rules, but here's a whole list of them.
Yeah, here's all our rules.
And again, that's what the IFC was created for, was to have those rules in place that the fighters knew about, not so much the fans. That was kind of kept hush-hush.
Yeah.
Just to keep the mystique alive, this being that horrible, brutal blood sport that Bruce Beck so wants it to be.
Yeah, and Ron Van Cleef is our figurehead of the day, who we don't mention that he already fought in the UFC. I don't know why they don't sell that. I mean, I understand it wasn't a very good performance, but it's not like people are going back and watching him at this point. No,
I don't get it either. I guess it was just such a quick loss. Maybe they don't want to mention it. I don't know, but I figured they should mention UFC veteran. But whatever. That's what they were doing. Let's just blame Jeff Blatnick on that one.
All right.
And
I can do that.
He did call Oleg Taktarov Oleg Taktarov at the beginning of the show.
Taktarov, and they were really trying to bill him as a man of mystery, and that's where they also billed him. They said he's an expert sambo fighter and also an unknown. I think that was a Jeff Blatnick line on Taktarov.
That sounds about right. We'll get to Taktarov or Takatov in a few. Just first few other big things I want to get past too. No more. We have a new ring announcer. Let's just go right into that.
Right.
We didn't realize we were supposed to say goodbye to Rich Goins. I didn't realize he was gone already. I thought he lasted a little bit longer.
Goings, gone.
Oh, you sir, get a slow clap for that one. You have earned it.
Gone.
Gone. That's right. No more of the double name. But we now have, at least for this one event, Ron Jeremy.
Infamous porn star Ron Jeremy stepping into the octagon.
That's right, and he's also a graduate of my local high school.
Wow.
Yeah. Useless trivia.
Also not the porn star.
No, unfortunately, no, it's not the porn star. We really wish it was. It's actually some very, very, to use the word mousy again. Here's the perfect guy. It's mousy. Ron Jeremy here. This little tiny blonde hair stick, matchstick of a human being, essentially, doing the ring announcing. To be fair, he was not the worst ring announcer.
No, he was just it became obvious as the night went on that he wasn't really used to it. But he was a local radio DJ. He had a decent voice, and he kept us going through the event.
Kept us alive somehow.
Yeah.
Somehow, barely.
Somehow, barely.
I already miss Rich Goins. I'm not gonna lie.
He kept us going. What?
I already miss Rich Goins. I can't lie.
Oh yeah. Well, you know, you always miss the sideshows when they're gone. The little weird things that made it special. And Goings, he was one of those weird things that made the early UFC broadcast special.
Good times. But all right, let's get running down into this card now because we got a big 8-man tournament once again. And the first thing to notice definitely is that this entire tournament is filled with guys that are all over 200 pounds.
Yeah, this was all, and you know, I really thought this shift happened a lot slower than it did, but suddenly it wasn't just black belts, it was huge guys, and some of them had black belts, but a lot. I mean, with the Joe-san and the Chemo, you started to see the slide towards giving guys actually just directly giving them false credentials in order to, you know, give a reason to get huge guys in the cage. They were basically telling you these people were martial artists or pretending they were martial artists, so they had a reason to push these steroid-stuffed bouncers into cage fighting.
Although, to be fair, I would say that this UFC had the most realistic records in terms of the guys' fights careers, with the exception of one or two gentlemen. Overall, I think they actually used the real records of a lot of these guys.
Yeah, for a lot of these guys, they were starting to understand what fighting they'd actually done. Not like I say, I mean, you get some really, like, the places they lie, it's really weird and really obvious. It's just like, why would you say that? Why would you tell us that? And then you're like, oh, and this guy's 7-3 or something, and he's 86-0 with 86 knockouts.
Yes, well, let's get to Mr. 86-0 in a second. I guess you want to talk about the alternate fights first, though. Let's get into those because there were 2 alternate fights once again, and I guess they are worth mentioning. I haven't actually watched them myself. I don't know if you were able to see them, Zane.
I only think I saw the Cancio Beneteau one was played during the event, and you can generally find that. I've seen Cancio Beneteau,
which was I believe a 21-second knockout.
Which was a 21-second knockout, and Cancio was a Wing Chun master, not to be confused with Wing Chun, which is exactly what it was. But apparently, I read somewhere that Cancio only had like a few months worth of training, even in Wing Chun, not even in like fighting, but just in his martial art, and it showed pretty badly. He
got knocked out in 21 seconds by Dave Beneteau.
Yep, and then Guy Metzger fought one of our most decorated martial arts masters to date in the great Hapkido master John Dowdy.
Guy Metzger making his return to the octagon. Yep. We saw him at the last UFC event where he won entrance into this tournament. You would assume that fight meant he would have been actually in the 8-man draw. Instead, he was just once again an alternate.
Yeah, although that may have had to do with Oleg Taktarov being in this tournament.
Yes, that's right, because apparently they were both training together at this point.
Yeah.
We'll probably mention a little bit more later on about that.
Well, we have to get to it certainly by the next event because it becomes a more infamous subtext to these early UFCs was all the guys training in Texas down together.
Sorry, yeah, that was the first stable, essentially, if you will, fighters that was really starting to make it out there.
Yep. And so, yeah, that may have been why maybe Metzger voluntarily went and took a prelim fight because they even said that, Taktarov was training with Metzger and that they didn't want to fight each other. And so that Metzger even made sure that he was the second alternate to be on call for this event, that Beneteau had status over him if they needed to fill in.
Which was almost kismet in a way for what Dave Beneteau wanted, but we'll get to that a little bit later, of course. And that's kind of like our catchphrase for these videos is we always say, we'll get to that later.
Yeah, we'll get to that later. We don't want to, it's so easy to just do like, well, this is what happened in the next 30 events, so...
And I know one of our commentators, one of our commenters on the YouTube page was actually complaining, and we're going to get right to that right now, in fact, about the mystery of Andy Anderson.
That's right. We do have to get to the mystery of Andy Anderson. So he appeared at all the UFC events, or before this. I don't think maybe at one. He wasn't at one.
No, we'd for sure seen him at UFC 3 in the crowd, and then again at UFC 4 in the crowd, and then finally here at UFC 5, he's making his grand entrance into the octagon here in the 8-man tournament of men who are all ginormous and over 200 pounds.
Yes, and you might say, well, that's because he's an 86-0 fighter, bare-knuckle fighter with all 86 wins by knockout. Certainly good enough credentials to get anyone into the UFC.
Yeah, somehow this overweight ginger has gotten 86 knockouts in bare-knuckle fighting that have been unrecorded. No actual history behind any of it whatsoever. Yeah, but at least he's got a kind heart, because if he had won the tournament, he was going to donate his 50 grand to a charity. He wasn't sure which charity, because the commentators listed about like 3 or 4 charities.
Yeah, they listed 3 or 4 that he could donate to. And all of that has to be seen as part of his great quest to get involved with MMA at any cost. Because in reality, he was the owner of the Totally Nude Steakhouse, which they mentioned in the video, but what they didn't mention is that that was where they were getting their ring girls for the event that night.
And I believe some of the previous events also, correct?
Was it? I only knew for this one. I didn't know that he provided ring girls for previous events.
I'm not positive on that, but I would assume he probably was. I mean, he was hanging out there with the seat that he had. He's always front row. I mean,
that's true. He was always front row. So he's providing ring girls. That's really... Then the promise of charity, that's what got him into the UFC. Because I don't know if... I'm sure he'd fought in his life. I mean, heck, he was a... well, I mean, he had white ties to white supremacy. I don't know if he's actually a white supremacist himself, but he was part of a motorcycle gang with ties to white supremacy. And at that point, I mean, ties to white supremacy is basically like saying white supremacists. Nobody just has ties to white supremacists. Like, oh, yeah, no, I know those guys. They're cool. But I'm not one.
When you're as pale as he is, I believe he needs to join any group that could help save his ass from getting kicked.
Yeah, and he's now doing 30 years in prison for meth dealing. So,
spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
And to be fair,
Herbert T. Andy Anderson, maybe not the nicest guy in the world.
No, and he definitely gets his just desserts here at his first fight, because he's going to be facing Big John Hess. Big is definitely not an understatement here. Big John Hess is 290 pounds. He has a 10-inch height advantage over Andy Anderson. Oh, man. But yeah, so John Hess, master of multiple martial arts, including the one he is a co-founder of, which was SAFTA. Zane, can you tell me what SAFTA stands for?
Oh, God. I was not expecting to be quizzed on this.
Always be prepared to explain what SAFTA is.
I can explain what SAFTA is, which is it's a port of the Navy SEAL training that they abandoned in the mid-90s because it was way too expensive and time-consuming for the results it got. But it was a transport of that, which is a transport of it's a kung fu brand that one of the others, I think it was Thaddeus Luster, used. Sansu Kung Fu. So Sansu Kung Fu becomes this Navy SEAL training, which becomes SAFTA, which John Hess brings into the cage, involving mostly eye gouging and sweatpants.
Yes, and don't try and dodge the question. You still have to tell me what SAFTA actually stands for.
Oh, damn it. Okay.
No cheating. I hear typing.
Well, I have to cheat. I don't know what it stands for.
Scientific Aggression Fighting Technologies of America.
South Asian Free Trade Area.
That is the different SAFTA. There's many SAFTAs out there. Fun trivia. I actually, when I used to listen to Jordan Breen's radio show back when he first began on ShareDog, I was the winner of his very first contest on ShareDog.com, where the contest was to make Jordan Breen laugh. And I simply sent him an email that said, I got 5 letters for you. And I spelled out SAFTA, and I won the contest and won a copy of Pride Bushido 9.
Nice. That's an excellent prize.
It really was. It's probably the best thing I've ever won in my life.
Yeah, no, that tops anything I've ever won right there.
I'm sorry that your life is shittier than mine.
Well, you know, I mean, I'm an internet blogger. How accomplished can I be?
SAFTA.
SAFTA.
That's all.
So yes,
That's how we should end all of our shows now. I want to just say SAFTA.
That's right, SAFTA. But, so yeah, John Hess, SAFTA, gave Andy Anderson a real kicking.
Literally.
Literally a real kicking, and a lot of gouging. And that instituted the end of the, I believe, the end of the eye gouging as a monetary fine.
Yeah, because John Hess got the crap fined out of him for all the eye gouging he did. I believe they caught him doing it twice. So he was fined $2,000, at least as far as we know. He was caught doing it twice. Definitely not a clean fighter. No, he's no Gilbert rival, but he's not a clean fighter.
Not a clean fighter. There's a great video of him getting absolutely beat to hell by Vitor Belfort out there.
I can't wait till we get. Maybe we'll review. What was that? Was that from Super Brawl? I think it is.
Yeah, I believe that was from Super Brawl. And Hess, on his part, claimed that he had not been training prior to UFC 6, which is why he didn't look as in incredible shape as he claimed to be, and then was really depressed because he couldn't find the high-level fights he wanted after getting the boot from the UFC, and gained a bunch of weight, and that's why he didn't look like a badass fighting Vitor Belfort either.
To be fair, he really never looked like a badass in any of his fights.
No, at some point you can make all the excuses you want, but your resume speaks for itself. And apparently he tried to mount a comeback because he was involved after that with Randy Couture's gym, the one that, not, the one he trained out of classically that I'm having trouble remembering now. With, like, Lindland and...
Team, you mean Raw or Quest?
Team Quest. There we go.
Should I edit this part out or should I leave it in?
I don't know. You can edit it out. Am I just totally wrong?
No, just all the dead air time.
Okay. Well, okay, he was involved with Team Quest for a long time, and he tried to mount a comeback. He always claimed he wouldn't fight for any of the smaller promotions because he was too big time for that. And
John Hess and his multitude of UFC appearances.
Yes, and eventually because of that, he never mounted a career comeback. So
probably for the best because his appearance here, I have it written down as my note. Hess wins by brutality. There wasn't really much to it. There's no finesse. He had a fighter in there, in Andy Anderson, that really was not a fighter. He was just a big fat guy wearing a very small tank top. It's not much of a fight at all. It's just Hess literally running across the cage, charging into him, just battering him with bear claws. That's really about it. And then eventually just getting him on all fours, which was now, of course, illegal. Back then, perfectly legal. And we got ourselves a nice little case of I don't know what a good word is. It's not really stomping, but it's more like he's basically just kicking his face into the fence. So
that can't really be called a kick. It's more like, it's more like he took his thigh and threw it at him and jammed it at him. It's not really a kick so much because a kick suggests it lands with like the shin or the foot, but it sort of was like a kick that kept landing with the knee. And it's not a knee because a knee lands with like a point. You have a pointed direction to how you throw a knee. Silly hand gestures aside. So
that's the fun part about using Google Hangout now is that all our viewers can actually see in HD all the crazy hand gestures we make.
That's right. It's not cut off anymore, so when I'm doing the Cecil Peoples fight, they can get to see the Cecil Peoples fight gesture.
Wow, we need to have you do that a lot more often now. We have to find as many excuses as we can to make you do that. So yeah, that was essentially Andy Anderson and John Hess. Is really nothing much to say, and that's kind of the theme for a lot of these fights in this event. Because we really, to be quite honest here, we previewed it. We mentioned it before. UFC 4 was really the end of a legit martial artists being martial artists. We're now just in a tough man competition.
Yeah, we're now just seeing huge dudes wail on each other through a tournament. That's really a lot of what's going on. And there were a lot of guys. All these guys had black belts and stuff, but very rarely would you know it to watch them fight.
Yeah, those black belts really kind of went out the window once the fights actually began. I guess we should move on to our next fight, which is Todd Medina taking on Larry Cureton, Thunderfoot Larry Cureton, which actually is a legit boxer. And again, they actually mentioned his record as being, I believe, was like 26 or 20, 26 wins with 23 by knockout. So there is an actual real fact, actual real record as far as I know.
Yeah. Larry Cureton was actually a pretty good kickboxer. Not a great kickboxer. He was like on the Kevin Rosier side of things, but a more technically sound one. He definitely had some good kicks. Went into boxing a little, not to any positive effect, but was a pretty good kickboxer and full-time firefighter.
Right, and standing on the opposite side of the fence from him would be Todd Medina, or as Jeff Blatnick incorrectly says, Medina, which just sounds wrong on so many levels. And yeah, so we have Medina, who is a Jeet Kune Do fighter. He's the first Jeet Kune Do fighter, I believe, to have appeared in the UFC. That's according to Blatnick, I believe, or Beck. I believe one of them said he's the first Jeet Kune Do fighter. I'm not sure if there were beforehand. Were there? Like, I feel like there was, but I can't remember one.
I don't know that there was a Jeet Kune Do fighter. I don't know that there's ever been a Jeet Kune Do fighter in the UFC, and I'm more than happy to include Todd Medina in that conversation. There was nothing going on there that suggested Jeet Kune Do.
No, I really don't know what to even call what that fight was. What Medina did was basically just shooting for a takedown immediately as the fight began, and that was essentially, I guess if you want to say anything, that was the extent of the Jeet Kune Do, using a takedown.
Yeah, well, I think Medina was... I think he'd been training with one of the Gracies at that time. I mean, I know he certainly went on to start a gym based around jiu-jitsu.
I don't believe that was... Yeah, I know they mentioned at this point that he was actually hanging out... He was good buddies with Kimo and Joe's son.
Yeah, that's always an awesome... That's always awesome credentials to have as a fighter.
Can you imagine that trio, like, after UFC 5, just walking around Charlotte, North Carolina? You got Todd Medina, Kimo, and Joe's son all together hitting the streets.
Oh, God. Todd Medina, I will say this right now, Todd Medina, he is really the first ground and pound fighter that you see out there. Dude was jacked to hell, got in the guard of Cureton, which, I mean, they called it the Gracie guard, which is really a terrible disservice to to the Gracies at that point for what Cureton was doing. And then Medina just wailed on him with headbutts and punches.
I was actually kind of somewhat impressed. I guess impressed not the right word. I was taken aback, maybe it's a better choice of words, by how the fight did unfold. The fact that Cureton knew to close his legs around the guy's waist and initiate some form of a guard, and that Medina was actually doing an early primitive form of ground and pound. That was kind of cool to see that guys are actually starting to learn a little bit. They were starting to pick up bits and pieces of what would eventually become the modern-day game plan. But here at this phase, they just have the bare basics. They just know close your legs so the guy can't get past your legs to get to mount, and punch the guy when they're on the ground with them so that they at least don't try to do as much.
Yeah, it was very. There was the advancement of knowing that once a guy's on his back, you should be trying to punch him, and once you're on your back, you should be trying to keep the guy right in front of you.
As for the fight itself, but honestly, that pretty much was the end of the fight. It was just sitting in his guard, hitting him a few times until he eventually tapped out.
Yeah.
I think that's the shortest fight recap we've ever had.
Yeah, not really a lot to say there. Oh, Cureton was a poet, though. I should have... he'll be back, so maybe when he comes back, I'll have one of his poems ready to read, and we can do a Larry Cureton poetry reading.
Larry Cureton's Poetry Slam.
That's right. You're ready. You know you're waiting for that now.
Well, now we got something to look forward to. Maybe I'll even bring back the mustache for that, too, just because...
Well, yeah, absolutely.
I just need an excuse. It falls right off. I need an excuse to wear this thing, and I spent all this time and money putting a Sharpie on a piece of Scotch tape. I mean, I got to use it somehow.
Indeed, it's your new look. It's a good look.
It smells like Sharpies. It's really, really irritating. Oh God.
All right.
Let's move ahead now to the next matchup, which is now the debut of Oleg Taktarov, the first real Russian to hit the UFC. Oleg Taktarov, he's going to be fighting Ernie Verdicia.
Yes, the fighting paramedic.
Yeah, I love that nickname, the fighting paramedic. Ernie was, we're going to talk plenty about Oleg in the future, but let's just talk about Ernie right now, because, I mean, fighting paramedic, that's just awesome. He was so bright and happy to be there, and ass kicked.
Yeah, no, and he was a Kempo champion. He's now a Krav Maga instructor in Florida. So
you got to pay the bill somehow, and that's what Krav Maga does. You got to get a nice little group of hipsters to train.
Yeah. And I mean, I would say this for Verdicia. He looked for as happy and bright and eventually taking a beating from Taktarov was, he at least looked like he was ready to fight. He came in and he was aggressive. No lack of aggression in there.
His aggression was definitely his undoing. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about Oleg Taktarov. I'm sure you've got some historical information on him as well. But I do have to say I genuinely enjoyed Taktarov's introduction video. I remember it very distinctly. So when I first got the UFC VHS back when I was watching this way back on VHS, you remember VHS, Zane, yes?
Yeah, barely. I have this very dim recollection of head cleaning.
It sounds dirty.
Well, my experiences with VCRs may have been different than yours.
Wow, I'm gonna go back on topic to Oleg Taktarov now because this is getting weird real quick.
All right. Yeah, back to Oleg Taktarov. So you loved Oleg Taktarov's promo piece.
I did. I remember watching when I was first watching these UFC tapes and seeing all these flying moves he was doing, the rolling knee bars. First time seeing a rolling knee bar, I believe. I was very impressed, and I just loved his opening line, too, when they started the video. He's like, "My name is Oleg Taktarov. I am from Gorky, Russia, and I now live in Dallas, Texas." I thought that was the greatest line ever, to introduce a Russian monster into the UFC.
Oh, yeah, no. Taktarov, I mean, they really wanted him to be, like, their man of mystery. And he was a fun fighter, no question, but he was not ready to do the promo side of it, really.
No, he was not definitely not ready to talk it, that is for sure.
He was not good on camera, which is funny because the whole reason he moved to the US was to be an actor. He done the whole like KGB Secret Service training thing over in Russia, and then won some proto MMA tournaments called like the White Dragon, or they keep referring to it as the Iron Gladiator tournament, I believe.
Which sounds freaking awesome.
It does sound awesome. I would love to have video footage of that. That would be really cool. But he'd already done some MMA. Was one of the very few fighters to come into these early UFCs with experience in MMA. And he moved to the US to be a movie star and decided to do more MMA to pay the bills. And it's a good thing he did because it A, made him a movie star, and B, gave him the chance to learn more English.
That's right, and here he is making his big American debut, and Ron Jeremy, of course, gives him a big American welcome as he tells the fans to do the same thing. And yeah, so the fight itself, though, as you mentioned, Verdicia, definitely very aggressive. He comes out with a head full of steam, looking really tense and just crazy. It takes him down, and Taktarov, that's kind of the funny part about this fight, is that Taktarov looks just so incredibly relaxed. I think even more than, I'd say definitely more than Royce Gracie would look relaxed being on his back.
Yeah, it's that whole stone cold Russian thing that they have down. I don't know. It's something about being. There's something about the whole Russian personality that, like, living your whole life with the sort of background depression that comes with a life lived in Russia that makes them incredibly stone-faced.
Cutting wood and shipping ice.
Yeah, and totalitarian regimes and
those two.
Mobsters and all that. It's just something that suddenly there's no more surprise in life. You never see Fedor getting really excited. It's not like, oh man, this is gonna be so cool. I don't know what's gonna happen. It's more like, hey, at least I'm not dead.
Yeah. That's Russia, and that's how we lost all of our Russian fans in one shot. Way to go.
Yeah, well, they'll pirate it and make a Russian version of it before you know it.
Russian old school MMA review.
That's right.
So yeah, but the fight itself, though, like we mentioned, again, very short, thankfully, and again, not much to say because these fights just with the level of guys that are fighting now, there's really not much to break down. It's just Taktarov ends up on his back, he goes for an armbar. Verdicia actually doesn't manage to get out of it the correct way as much as possible. But eventually ends up just, once Taktarov decides to finally just turn it on and finish this damn thing, he just easily rolls him over, puts him in a scarf hold, and Verdicia immediately taps out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Taktarov looked like such a badass after that fight, too. I mean, it's funny because he, apparently he was just trying to, I don't know what his whole deal was. He apologized or something later, but he looked so cool coming off that fight. He was just like steaming and angry and just stomping around the ring, sort of like head down.
He was Russian.
He was Russian, yeah. Verdicia he looked like a gym teacher that took a beating.
That's a very accurate summation of how he looked. Yeah, I mean, really, again, not much we can say about the fight. That's really it. It was just, even though it was about 3 minutes long, or maybe a little bit longer, just really nothing happened. That's kind of what we're going to see a little bit in this event. But hey, the plus side is that we get to see more of Taktarov coming up next. So he's moved on to the next round, and he's going to face the winner of this match here, which is Dan Severn and Joe the Ghetto Man Charles, who's making his second UFC appearance.
That's right, Joe Charles, and he fights in a ghetto way. That's via Jim Brown.
Yeah, this is clearly Jim Brown's favorite guy in the entire event. I just think the outfit he was wearing. Yeah, again, I mean, another fight nerd flashback here for me. I remember one of the very first issues, if not the first issue I ever got, of Grappling Magazine. A lot of you old school fans will probably remember that magazine as being really the best way to get all the photos and everything else before the internet really was bigger. Grappling Magazine had like a 5 or 6 page spread all about Joe Charles, and it's essentially completely uninteresting in every way possible. But the best part was just the photo of Joe demonstrating various moves related to grappling. And every single one of them was just done with him standing directly in front of his opponent, not ever moving his legs or hips, just everything's just upper body. Guillotine, armbar, upper body. Doesn't move one step back, never one step forward, just always square, flat. That was how he fought.
Well, dude was a badass. Me saw that his entrance promo, or his pre-fight promo. That is one of the best promos I have ever seen.
What was that ball he was playing with? Didn't they start selling that ball recently online?
With the whole like robe and the headdress.
Oh, you mean Shaq as Shazam, right?
Yeah, Shazam. At the end, his end line was he said that he was raised in the streets, and then in his end line, I'm out of here.
I'm out of here. Peace and love.
Yeah. That was so awesome. Joe Charles' entrance was awesome. The funny thing is, though, they didn't talk about this. I mean, I think they mentioned that he had some judo.
Yes, he does have a big judo background, and Joe. That's why his corner was actually Gokor Chivichian.
Yeah, they didn't mention that.
Big legitimacy right there, but they didn't even mention that.
He was training with Gokor and Jean LaBelle. I mean, that was where his judo background was Gokor Chivichian and Jean LaBelle. Yeah,
I mean, I not to give a spoiler away, but of what we're going to talk about in the next 30 seconds, but I really wish we had seen more of Joe Charles in the UFC. I think he at this point holds the record for the fastest finish in the UFC at this time. And I don't think we got a chance to really see enough of him, and I feel like we should have gotten another chance.
Well, he had a plenty long career, and most of it wasn't brilliant. I mean, I think apparently I read some interview with him, and his thing was just that he never really figured out how to train for the sport at all. So it was always just like, I'm gonna work really hard and get kind of injured and go in there and fight anyway.
That's our ghetto man.
Yeah, that's our ghetto man. Like I say, with those judo credentials, the ghetto man is such a weird misnomer because it's like, oh yeah, he fights from the streets. No, he doesn't. He's he fights with a serious background in judo. He
fights like he's dressed like a genie. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're basically giving him a nice big talking right now because he's fighting Dan Severn, who obviously, as you guys can tell, this event is named after Dan Severn for a reason. So poor Joe Charles has the unfortunate luck of being the first man to draw against Severn.
Yeah.
The fans are in love with it now. Severn, by the way, is sporting his newly won NWA heavyweight title as well.
Yes, God knows what. So apparently there's a whole story behind that we'll need to go into, but that was such a weird crossover of Dan Severn, NWA champ, and promoting himself with that, walking into a cage.
And the fact that they were actually announcing it as part of his to actually be a fighter, winning that title. I guess we should do a little quick history lesson right now on the NWA title because it actually is one of the most illustrious and prestigious titles in all of professional wrestling. It's been, I'm sure, one of the oldest, held by some of the most influential wrestlers of all time. And the way Severn ended up getting the belt was actually because, it's an interesting story, it leads into the creation of ECW. Everybody knows ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling.
Even I know ECW.
And Zane hates pro wrestling.
I don't hate pro wrestling, but I don't watch it.
Quit being a hater, Zane. You're such a hater.
I'm such a hater. I'm sorry. I'm such a I'm so
Your non-fixed sports.
I know. What can you say? If I wasn't so pragmatic, I'd be such a hater.
It's still real to me, damn it.
That's right. It's still real to you.
So yeah, ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling. What happened with that was back in 90, whatever year that was. I'm blanking now.
94?
Shane Douglas, 93 actually that happened, I believe. But Shane Douglas won a tournament to become the ECW champion. He ended up, or the NWA championship. He basically took that title and threw it in the trash and said, no, we're breaking away. ECW became its own company. It was no longer East Coast Wrestling. It was now Extreme Championship Wrestling. And essentially left and annexed itself away from the NWA, which left, obviously, the company without a champion. So a big tournament was held, which ended up with Chris Candido beating Tracy Smothers to become the then NWA World Champion. And that led to Dan Severn facing off against Candido. And Severn won by submission, making himself the new champion, adding a lot of legitimacy to a company that really needed it at that point, because NWA was pretty much on its way out. They needed some big help at that point. And having Severn become their champion added a lot of legitimacy to the company. And Severn did go on to have a very, very long title reign, one of the longest in the history of his company. Not the longest ever, but a very long collective title reign. And he ended up actually winning that belt a second time many years later. That's a story that's not really worth getting into. But, yeah, Dan Severn, NWA champion, walks out with the belt. Very proud of that belt. And really, to be fair, looking at that belt was probably the biggest highlight for this fight.
Yeah, it would be. That would be so much more impressive if it wasn't pro wrestling.
Yeah.
Longest championship reign. It's like, wow, he really didn't get told to lose.
The NWA just was so weak at that point that they had to keep it on Severn, basically.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it's funny too because Severn went on later to say that he really liked the Japanese shoot style of wrestling more, and because he didn't have to do so much promo work, it wasn't all storyline based.
Yeah, because
boy did that ever show in his career.
Yeah, thank you. That's perfect lead-in because, man, this guy, they made him do all these promos because obviously they're trying to hype up as the next big thing, but, man, Dan Severn's promos suck. I mean, I'm going to try and find it. We talked about it last time, too. Dan Severn just cannot work a mic, and here he's improved ever so slightly, more so in the fact that he's not as monotone as he was in the last event.
Yeah, he and, well, I will say this, because we got to get into the fight, which was not that, I mean, I don't know.
Here's the fight in a nutshell, guys. Severn takes him down. Joe Charles flops around. He tries to go onto the cage to defend himself. Severn peels him off, chokes him out, end of the fight. There you go. We can talk about that.
But Severn is uber pumped. I will say uber there for how pumped up Dan Severn was after beating Joe Charles. That was the full arms raised, screaming beast mode.
My mustache fell.
Exactly.
Mustache is worthless.
Damn it.
Spent all this time coloring in a piece of tape. God. Yeah, I mean, really, again, there's not much to say about this fight. Although the commentators were, once again, suggesting that Severn couldn't finish the fight, even though, really, the only fight he hasn't finished at this point was against Royce Gracie.
Yeah, I mean, he was a pretty decent finisher of fights at this point. And, I mean, looking at it, a lot of that was just because guys would get exhausted and panic in there against him when he got on top of him. But he got a lot of submissions due to strikes or due to pain. A lot of pain submissions.
A lot of pain submissions. You don't really see pain submissions anymore.
No, that's really gone away in
lost art.
MMA. Lost art of the can opener.
Yeah, I miss the can opener, man. Remember when wrestlers used to use that all the time?
Yes.
When's the last time you've seen a can opener used in the UFC?
I saw one in Invicta just the other day, I think. I think Claudia Gadella might have used one against Ayaka Hamasaki, I want to say. If
that's true, then Bloody Elbow needs to give her an award at the end of the year for being the first female fighter, or just first fighter in general, to use a can opener and actually beat somebody in like a decade.
Yeah, there was a can opener. I've seen a few of them. Mostly they fail miserably. That's why they don't get used.
Unless you're a giant wrestler, which I guess we'll see a few more of later on. But yeah, I miss the can opener. What a great move. That's totally ineffective in modern MMA.
Yeah. Oh, Lord.
That's pretty much Severn. Joe Charles. I mean, really, there's not much to add. Severn just plows through him. Yeah, I can't say else. It's just a sign of the times for these UFCs, how it's just big, tough guys who weren't really very skilled at much of anything. They're just very, very big and tough.
Yeah, not a lot going on here. Just really, it was really became a pain contest. Who could survive? Who could withstand the most and move on? And it was, yeah, it was a bit weird at that point. I'm definitely, yeah, Dan Severn. But he was fired up. I appreciated him being fired up. That made me fired up. And then suddenly we're on to the next fight, which was oh wait, no, actually I want to see. This is why we need the editability, because I'm going all over the place here. This was where I thought, I want to talk, because Severn's super fired up, and the big thing I noticed right now suddenly was that the having no martial arts experts in the booth was really starting to hurt the promotion.
Well, he did have
Because
Jeff Blatnick, who was busy saying how great wrestling is whenever he could.
yeah, well, calling what Joe Charles was trying to do an arm extension, and basically nobody was able to really talk about what was going on in the fight. But and now we move. So now we have our first alternate thing, and like I said, we talked about earlier with Metzger not wanting to participate and fight Taktarov. We have Beneteau coming in for John Hess.
That's right. Hess, as we mentioned, being the dirty, dirty fighter that he was, he got fined.
And he broke his hand. He injured his hand. He bruised his hand, which I mean, I read some interviews with him, and I don't know that he ever disputed that. But you can't help feeling that they maybe were quick to make sure that he didn't move on.
You got to wonder about that, too. I mean, I'm not sure. I feel like they probably would have liked to move on because he was such a giant, scary man.
That's true.
But I do think, yeah, he did have a hand injury. It's of some kind. That's what pushed him out. And that's what got Dave Beneteau into the tournament now. And this was apparently his big dream. He envisioned that he wanted to be an alternate and that he wanted to come in the second round.
Yeah.
So, he's really kind of living the Steve Denham dream here.
I thought he was even saying that he hoped that he'd come in on one fight into the final.
Yeah, that would be too good to be true. But he's made it in. He's had one last fight that he needs to do now.
He's living the Canadian dream today.
Canadian dream, that's right. Canadian Beneteau. We'll be seeing plenty more of him. I forgot. Yeah, I actually forgot all about Beneteau too. He completely was erased from my MMA history mind for whatever reason. I don't know why, but seeing him again in action, it's a whole wave of nostalgia.
Yeah. There are all these fighters who had very limited windows of had a lot of success in a very limited window, and then just kind of fell off the earth.
I can't wait till we get to Scott Ferozzo.
Oh God, have you seen that? Have you seen his big Tank Abbott Scott Ferozzo too?
Oh yeah, we're gonna get to that another day. But
Yes.
yeah, let's just get this one over with because again, not much to say here either. It's Dave Beneteau, it's Todd Medina. It's a quick fight.
It's a quick fight. Todd Medina panic taps here. He's a blood technician in a medical lab. They like to bring up, and I'm sort of wondering if blood technician is not a street name for steroid dealer.
I think one of those guys that he just sits overnight and he looks at blood samples. That's pretty much what he does. He's got like a bunch of slides. He's got to look at them, and then he goes home.
Yep. Now I had a very similar job, so I can sympathize with him. But
you were a steroid dealer too. You were a steroid dealer also.
That's right, steroid dealer as well. And but this fight did get the nice highlight of Big John calling everyone baby.
I wish we could cut in like actual footage of this event without being sued by Zuffa, but we can't. So y'all have to go out and buy the actual DVD of this thing. But yeah, Big John was in style in this event for sure. He
was styling out there. He was with the he had the he babies ready. Come on, baby, let's go.
He's really trying to find his voice, I guess, in this event now. He's like starting to realize people are recognizing him, and I guess he's beginning to become that celebrity Big John that we all know and love today. So he's trying to find what it is that he should do to make himself out there. And I'm just happy that him calling people baby has not stuck.
That's true. That's true.
So yeah. I mean, Zane, is there anything else that we can mention before this fight? I can't think of anything.
The only other thing I think Mike Jaworski may have been the manager for both Beneteau and Medina. Interestingly,
Interesting.
so
Oh, the towel was thrown in, I believe, for this fight, wasn't it?
yeah, well, it was thrown in at the same time that, like I sort of feel like Medina panic tapped there. He got stuck on the bottom and got hit once and was just like, done, that's it, fight's over. Jim Brown was really taking it to Medina's ground ability there, talking about how these guys need to learn more on the ground, which was weird considering that, I don't know, like, there was just, Medina had some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training. He just obviously was no good off his back, which, I don't know. There was a lot of weird stuff going on in these early days. Like, everybody was scrambling to jump on Jiu-Jitsu, and the announcers were scrambling to call Jiu-Jitsu. And so there was a lot of, like...
Not Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. We have to be very clear on that.
Yeah, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu.
Patent pending.
Patent pending, yeah. And so the commentary gets really weird a lot of times in here with them trying to identify, like, what's actually functional technique and what's just two big guys rolling around on the canvas. And really all of it could probably, except for Taktarov, could pretty much be summed up as two big guys rolling around on the ground.
Yeah, especially here at UFC 5. That's a lot of that. But yeah, let's just get right into Severn versus Taktarov, as you mentioned, because otherwise we're going to just talk about how crappy that last fight was for hours. So, but luckily, Severn Taktarov, definitely one of the, I guess we give this one the award for the most technical fight of the night, I would say.
Yeah. And interesting note here, Taktarov now has the nickname the Russian Bear.
It didn't take long at all.
No. Do you know why he has the nickname the Russian Bear, though?
I don't, but I bet you do.
I do. His promoter, Adam something, I'm blanking on his name right now, the only thing he knew about Russia was bears and vodka, and he couldn't think of a suitable nickname to make out of vodka, so the Russian Bear it was.
We could have had Oleg the Vodka Warrior Taktarov.
That's right. If only you'd been his promoter, then we could have had the Vodka Warrior.
It's not too late, Oleg. You got my number. Give me a call, bro.
That's right.
Yeah, so this fight, though, was actually pretty good. It went basically the same way any Severn fight goes. Of course, that Severn takes Taktarov down right away, and Taktarov, he defends it as much as he wants to, but eventually Severn, with that big weight advantage, does overwhelm him, gets him down. To his credit, though, Taktarov hangs in there, is very relaxed, and he actually goes for a very good armbar attempt off his back against Severn. That puts Severn in a bit of trouble.
Yep. It was a good technical showing from Taktarov, and very much showed exactly what kind of fighter he was, which was that he wanted to be, like, he wanted that ground battle and to be shifty and crafty on the ground. Got him in a lot of trouble, won him a lot of fights, but very much the story of his career. Never going to be a stand-up fighter was Oleg.
No, especially with a face that cuts open as easily as he did, and that's kind of his undoing here too, was that armbar off his back, because that put him, once Severn got out of danger, it put Taktarov in a very, very precarious position that allowed Severn to start dropping some really brutal knees to his face, and that would be the perfect time for Bruce Beck to start dropping the word brutal, because those were some rough knees to watch.
Yeah. And this was also I didn't write down exactly what it was, which was silly in retrospect. But this is this was where I first started to notice that Jim Brown and Jeff Blatnick were really starting to snipe at each other with their commentary over this fight. I think they were trying to they were starting to get into the whole thing where Blatnick would often he would say, like, well, what do you think? Does size play a part here? And then Jim Brown would be like, I always say size doesn't play a part. He's like, well, I think this time it might. And then, and be like, well, I guess we'll just have to see about that. And that would be their, they started this weird dynamic that was always sort of the sniping commentary. And
well, for sure, they definitely had different styles of commentating and preference to the kind of fight. Brown is obviously a stand-up kind of guy who's been slowly learning about ground stuff, whereas Blatnick is this very accomplished wrestler who appreciates the ground game a lot more, and obviously is very much in favor of calling things with those wrestling terminologies and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and there was also, I think there was a thing that, it's one of the things that I actually appreciated about Jim Brown as a commentary.
Besides the hat?
Besides the hat, which I'll always remember. but it was that he was very much like the keeping it real side of commentary of like, the technique isn't what's important, not the size. Everybody's skilled out here. It's not a street fight. Being very like, I don't know, professional, and fighting is, not just a caged bloodbath. And the Blatnick and Beck were much more on the promo side of things of like, let's ask, and I mean, it's a broadcasting style that's still pretty prevalent, which is let's ask the same questions and reintroduce the same topics over and over again. So for our new viewers and our new audience, and what do you think is, and like, oh God, I mean, there were no post-fight interviews in this one.
Yeah, I noticed I was missing too. There was no post-fight interviews at all of any of the fighters. I mean, I guess they were doing that at this point probably because it's a tournament. They wanted to give these big guys some time to rest. But I was a little surprised that there were no post-fight interviews. But then again, there was no one hired to do that. There was no there's no one there.
And I guess you haven't watched the next one yet, but you'll see very clearly why there were no post-fight interviews. That becomes Jeff Blatnick's job, and he is probably every bit as bad at doing post-fight interviews as our notorious what's his name?
Brian Kilmeade?
Yeah.
Brian Kilmeade. We hardly knew ye.
He's Brian Kilmeade level of bad on the post-fight interview.
Yikes. So, Zane, did you notice during the Severn Taktarov fight, let's get back on track too about that, when Severn actually asked Big John what was going on, because he was pounding on Taktarov so much, he was like waiting for the stoppage to happen.
Yeah, and yeah, that was definitely, that was a brutal fight, and but what's weird is that like, it shows very much some of the thing about Severn, which was that watching him fight, I mean, he finished guys, but he never looked comfortable hurting people.
No.
He never looked comfortable really like, I'm going to punch you in the head and try and knock you out. It was like, I'll make something painful, but I want to break something. Or I don't want to, like, and so Taktarov took a lot of damage, but it was really kind of unclear why that fight was stopped when it got stopped. And I guess it might have been partially just because Severn was protesting that it needed to be stopped.
I think part of it was that the commentators noticed it too, that maybe Big John just didn't clearly see what was happening. Because when Severn was asking for it, Taktarov was still defending himself. He had a hand kind of covering where the cut was. So most likely Big John just didn't see the cut and didn't see all the blood, because it was a lot of blood. But Taktarov was covering it because he knew, obviously, that Severn was going to go for it, and Severn was. It looked like Severn was digging his finger around over there to make it bigger. And Taktarov, even the back of Taktarov's head was busted open. So there's a lot of damage that just Big John just had not seen.
Yeah, but I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, heads bleed a lot. Did that really mean that the fight needed to be stopped? Yeah,
not necessarily. I mean, it could have kept going, I think. But at that point, the way the rules were, things were so unclear that it just had to end.
Yeah, things were so unclear. And, of course, they didn't have the restart, which, spoiler alert.
Yeah, I guess we should get to that one now. So we should move on ahead. So we have our finals now in the tournament. We'll get to the finals in a little bit. But in between that, we have what the event was actually billed around initially, because as we know, the UFC tapes are all named incorrectly. This whole event was really UFC 5, the Superfight. It had nothing to do with the Return of the Beast, because the Beast was not marketed yet as this big star.
Yeah. It was all about finally getting Ken Shamrock to fight Royce Gracie.
That's right. After 4 events where this whole enormous feud has happened, we are now going to finally have the epic culmination between Ken One-Punch Shamrock and Royce Gracie.
And was there a Gracie side to this feud? You've hinted that there was. I know that Ken, I have no doubt that Ken felt like he really needed to prove himself against Gracie. He went on about how people were underrating his technique. The announcers went on about how people were underrating his technique. And, that he had his whole private thing that he was really wanting to prove. But was there anything from Gracie about really feeling like he needed to prove something against Ken Shamrock?
Well, for sure, a clean win over Ken would have been a big deal, because this was a fight they were trying to build for so many events. And for sure, as well, with the Gracie still behind the UFC, this was a big fight in terms of just getting his name out there and beating this big monster, if you will, in Ken Shamrock. This guy has been really pushing it and fighting his way to get to Royce again. I think now's a good time to actually bring in my little textbook for this fight here. I have myself a copy of Inside the Lion's Den by Ken Shamrock. This is my
There is no more well-regarded text than that.
No, not in all the history of MMA. And, of course, it goes plenty into his whole feud against Royce. And, of course, this book being as biased as it is towards Ken's side, it is interesting to note that there's all sorts of reasons that Ken has for this fight not happening beforehand. But he does mention that at the fighters' meeting before the event actually happened, he said everything was quite cordial. He said Bob Shamrock and Helio Gracie were both very polite to each other. And, really, it seems to me, though, the only person that really was crazy about this fight was just Ken.
Yeah, exactly. That's my thought.
That's how Ken always was. Ken was always he had to be that angry guy. He had to be in that angry place to really fight well.
Yeah, I never really saw any evidence at any point, or even heard anything from Royce Gracie, who's done 100 billion boring interviews, that he had some great blood feud with Ken Shamrock. That was something that really meant a lot to his career.
Yeah, it was mostly just Ken being Ken, and then the UFC taking advantage of that because they really wanted to push Ken. That's why they gave him this stupid nickname here, One Punch Shamrock.
Oh God.
And that nickname did not stick, and we'll see that the UFC gives him a lot more nicknames in the next few events.
Oh yeah.
He's their big guy, and again, UFC 3 was originally going to be this entire thing, except that it was a tournament with the hopes of it happening. Here, UFC was smart enough now to just make a whole new Superfight division. They have a whole Superfight title, just to get those one fights that the fans wanted to see so bad. And it was a great idea. And it's an idea that stuck around for a very long time. And so here we have the first ever match for that Superfight Championship. I'm going to probably reference this book a few more times, of course, but I think this book probably did a better job of explaining the fight than actually watching it. Because man, that was something else. People love to remember Ken Shamrock and Dan Severn too, but man, you guys got to sit back and watch Ken and Royce at UFC 5.
Yeah, that was terrible. That was something that everyone should be ashamed of.
Yeah, and I do want to mention before we actually start discussing how horrible this fight was, I want to mention something that Bruce Beck brought up, because we talked about it in the last event as well, how the UFC just suddenly seemed to ignore Harold Howard's essential defeat of Royce Gracie.
Yeah,
so
no.
They did mention it in a way. They mentioned that Royce is undefeated in the UFC, but he has one no contest.
Ah, did they say that in the one no contest?
Bruce Beck says no contest.
I missed the no contest. What I did hear, which I loved because they talked so much about how the Gracies have never lost, was that Royce Gracie's father lost to Aldemar Santana in a 3-hour match in which his arm was broken.
Yeah, and they still haven't mentioned the Kimura fight yet either.
No.
Basically, as time went on and the Gracies started to lose their luster, more and more of these fights started coming out. Basically, the fights that the family had lost.
Yeah.
Not to be fair, majority of their fights that they won.
They were. It's not like they're bad at jiu-jitsu, but
no, they were a very dominant family. It's just that they kind of tried to hide a few of those losses.
It's the whole martial arts mysticism thing. You can't, it's always 276-0.
68-0 and bare knuckle fights, all by.
That's right. That's right.
So yeah, the fight itself, it's Speedo versus Gi. Fight starts off. Ken gets him in the takedown. They go and hoist his guard, and I'll see you in 30 minutes.
Oh yeah, I made some notes for this. I made some notes
also. I wrote the letter Z over 2 lines on my paper.
First of all, I wanted to note that they list Shamrock at 205 for this fight, and he looks huge.
Yeah, he's not 205.
He looks way bigger than I have ever seen him look at any other point in his career.
As we've seen, I think it was UFC 3 where they announced Ken at one weight, and the graphics said another. Clearly, they're trying to make, for whatever reason, they're trying to hide what weight he actually is. And he was for sure bigger than 205. He was enormous.
Yeah, he was gigantic. But my notes for the fight were Gracie stomp going on, punch, suddenly longest worst fight in UFC history.
Yeah, that's really the whole fight. And I love reading about. I'm going to read a paragraph from Ken's book here about this fight because it's just so worth it, and it really sums up everything else so that we can just move on ahead of this crap fest. But basically, the way this book is written, he says Gracie was on bottom, Shamrock's on top, and there for many long minutes they remained. And that's not an understatement. And from there, this author just really tries to show how Ken doing nothing was actually offensive.
It was offensive, all right.
It was offensive, yes. He just basically says, Gracie tried to peck his heels into Shamrock's kidneys. Shamrock did not flinch. Gracie tried to chip at Shamrock's neck with rabbit punches. Shamrock was oblivious. He sure was, because he didn't do a damn thing about any of those strikes. And to be fair, I did check on CompuStrike after, because I was curious about this. Had there been judges, because by the way, there were no judges at the super fight, had there been judges, this would have been a tough fight to score, but in reality, Gracie actually landed more strikes, a lot more strikes, because he was doing all those terrible rabbit punches and all those kidney stomps.
Yeah, no, I mean, he had, he didn't win. Nobody won that. Nobody won that.
We're all losers for watching it.
We're all losers for watching it, and it was even a draw. So not even on paper did anybody win that fight.
No, I mean,
it was the losingest losing fight in the history of losing. Nothing has lost as much as that fight.
I mean, to be fair, I will say some stuff did come out of it that was good for the future of MMA.
Yeah.
We would see years later when Sakuraba would fight Royce Gracie at Pride at the Grand Prix. And I after rewatch this fight, because I haven't watched this fight in years either, for obvious reasons, because it sucks. I'm positive that Sakuraba had to have watched this match to get a good game plan against Royce, because Sakuraba essentially uses the same game plan that Ken does, except that Sakuraba actually implements some kind of aggression and actual attacks on his opponent. Where Sakuraba here, and Sakuraba did this, and as Shamrock was doing, Shamrock was constantly, whenever Royce's hips shifted, Ken shifted with them so that he couldn't get caught in a submission hold. He was basically doing everything he could to not get submitted.
Yeah.
He wasn't doing anything to try and submit him back.
No, or even, well, why not? Why would you want the fight on the ground? Like, why do you need the fight there?
Well, it's obviously because Ken's quote-unquote 205-pound weight frame was meant to hold down Gracie for as long as he could, since Ken had this now strategy of just being able to not get tapped out. And that was what this seemed like the fight was to me, was that basically he'd get his leg standing whenever he could, which only happened twice in the whole fight, and that was once at the beginning and then once at the reset, and then just get whatever damage he could, and that was that. I mean, because really the whole fight was just Ken and Royce's closed guard, nothing. And then really most of the damage that Ken did was in that 5-minute overtime round.
Yeah, they cut to I think Brett Beck said that Helio was shouting instructions, and they cut to the video of Helio just sitting there dead silent.
Totally bored like a skeleton.
Yeah, looking like a totally bored skeleton. And they also cut to some footage of Jorge and Gracie looking like Freddie Mercury, which...
Is it mustache time again? I feel like it's
mustache time again. Looking like Jorge and Gracie as Freddie Mercury playing Dan Severn in Return of the Beast.
I know what my Halloween costume is this year.
That's right. And but I will give one thing I will give a lot of credit here to is the crowd. They really wanted this fight to be exciting, and it took like a full 20 minutes for them to hate it.
I actually noticed the boos began about 4 minutes in, but they were small, light boos.
There were a few, but I mean, they would get excited at like any little.
They might have been saying boo earns, maybe. I don't know.
Boo earns, yeah. I mean, it really took late into the fight for the crowd to go full boo mode.
Yeah, they were really looking forward to this fight. Everybody, to be fair, who was a UFC fan at that point, wanted this fight to be exciting. They were hoping it to be exciting. And I guess part of it, too, was that, having seen Severn's match with Royce at the last events going as long as it did, I mean, I guess that the fans figured it was going to be a long haul of a fight. Even Blatnick says that about 4 minutes in also when the boos began. He says, we might have a long one here. And it definitely was a long one.
Yeah, somehow everybody was prepared for this fight to take forever.
And the commentators were not as prepared, although I do have to say I think they did a good job keeping themselves and the audiences at home listening mildly entertained. I think they were dying a little bit, of course, as it went on, but I think overall, being a commentator, we have one of these long, grueling fights when nothing's happening. It's not an easy thing to deal with, and I think considering this was really the first big test of that, they did pretty good.
Yeah, no, they did all right. I mean, they had all sorts of random stuff they said in there. At some point, Blatnick says he tries to explain that Gracie can't be aggressive from the guard, that's not really an aggressive position.
I have a quote from Bruce Beck where he said, this is two submission fighters going head-to-head, literally body to body.
That's right, literally body to body. Oh, God. And so, yeah, I mean, it was just... They did all right. They were totally
grasping for straws, though. I remember they did, in fact, at one point mention Ken Shamrock being in Denzel Washington's new movie, Luminosity.
Ooh, a Denzel Washington movie I have not, in fact, seen.
Yeah, I have not seen it either. I mean, it's got Denzel, so we got to see it, obviously. But
that's right.
Yeah, we got to look for that somehow. If I can find it, I'll cut it in. But yeah,
that's right.
So I mean, yeah, really, we've already talked more about the fight that deserves to be talked about. It was just 35 minutes of nothing. And even midway during the fight, I mean, Blatnick mentioned that just going the distance and getting a draw would be a win morally for Ken.
Which it wouldn't be. It shouldn't be at all. No.
Not at all.
I
No,
mean,
it's still a draw. A draw's a draw.
the funny thing is that Shamrock, at the end of this, he was super happy when that fight ended. He was all like smiles and shaking hands, and the crowd was really happy with him, which made no sense to me.
I mean, according to the book, I'm just speaking at it right now. Shamrock was happy with it. He was content. That's what he wanted. He went the distance with Shamrock, with Ken. Obviously there were no judges, so there was no winner in the end. That was part of the rules, is that if it went the distance, it was a draw, which was a garbage rule. But and that was probably a Gracie rule. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, I mean, Ken, morally, it was a victory for Ken because he avenged, if you will, his loss that he had. He got his second fight with Royce, and he did do more damage, theoretically. He, at least by the end of the fight, Royce's face was a lot worse looking than Ken's.
Oh, yeah. When they did the second restart, Ken busted Royce up a couple of times pretty bad before he decided to drop back down into the guard.
Yeah, so I'm gonna throw some homework out, though, to all of our viewers right now. And we're going to have a poll up on bloodyelbow.com where we're going to have you guys decide who would have actually have won had there been judges. Would it have been Ken, would it have been Royce, or would it have just remained a draw because it was still a pretty close fight with considering how little stuff was happening?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm going to throw it to you right now, Zane, though. I mean, do you think it would have been a win or a loss for Ken?
Well, that's tough to know because, I mean, knowing the history of MMA judging, it would have been a win because he had top control. I mean...
But Royce was more active off his back and did land more strikes, even though
but that's going with the love of that's the judging we want, not the judging we have.
Is this the Dark Knight?
The judging we have says that the guy with top control is winning the fight. I mean, 95% of the time. Occasionally, you'll see a guy who's active off his back win a fight, but especially in the early era of MMA, I mean. Ken had top control. Ken won. But I'm now remembering that Boss Rutan won the heavyweight title underneath Kevin Randleman.
You see right there. So yeah, and considering what Royce was doing off his back, he was pretty effective. And we have the actual CompuStrike stats where Royce threw like 300 strikes off his back, whereas Ken did not throw nearly as many. But Ken landed more significant strikes. Although there's very few of those, and he had the takedown. But I mean. And then how do you even score him, being able to neutralize Gracie's offense off his back? I mean, it's a tough one to score for sure. That's why we're going to let our fans deal with it.
Well, the grappling is, if you're trying to be practical, the grappling's a wash, and Ken should win because he actually did more damage. But if you're trying to, and, CompuStat, Gracie won. Practical, it was a draw. What we have, Ken won. That's what I would say.
All right, well, we're going to let the bloodyelbow.com viewers decide who actually won. There's a poll at the bottom of the page. You guys can check it out and vote for who actually won, or if it was even just a draw still. So let's just move on from that fight because, that fight sucked ass. Holy shit. Yes. So let's go on to the finals of UFC 5.
The finals of the Xenophobic Fighting Championships, where we have Russia versus Canada, and nobody will shut up about where they're from.
USA.
Wait,
no, hold on. I can. Canada. I have no idea why there's a Canadian flag in my room randomly like that, but there is, so I feel the urge to wave it around.
There you go.
Canadian fans, this is for you. You're never going to see that again until Dave Benavides fights again. Yeah, so this fight again, Zane, do you want to run through it? I mean, really, what's to say?
So we have Severn and Benato right here. Yes. So it was the quotes for Severn here were taking on a man from Canada, earlier took on a guy from Russia. That was our fight commentary.
That's pretty much better than the whole fight.
Yeah. And I actually what I would have to say about this fight is that Benato could have won it if he wasn't set on doing his whole Greco-Roman judo thing.
I can agree with that. Severn overpowered Benatal here, much like he did to Taktarov. There's not much to really say. I mean, he eventually got the takedown, he got inside control, got the key lock submission to win. I think Benatal could have done better.
Because Benato was like, he was hitting Severn hard when they were on the feet, he was able to like keep some of the takedowns off of him, but he really wanted to try and get his own grappling going.
I think Benavides didn't really respect what Severn brought to the table.
Yeah. I mean, he thought, oh, I'm a grappler. I do judo. I have a Greco-Roman background, amateur Greco-Roman background. I can hang with Severn in the wrestling department, and that was not the case.
No, and that's pretty much the whole show. I mean, Dan Severn gets the win. He wins the $50,000 oversized novelty check.
Yep. His mom, has the woman who's not his mother, but I will always think of as his mother out there.
Phyllis Lee.
Yep, Phyllis Lee.
Phyllis Lee, yeah, and Severn gets the check, he gets the win. He's now got the UFC title on one shoulder and the NWA title on the other, and that's our show. And then Bruce does mention there's going to be UFC 6 coming up soon, so that's announced. Wow, there's going to be another UFC show.
Yep.
Holy crap.
Holy crap, who knew? And
Yeah.
I want to say, this UFC, the belt seems like a really weird idea when you watch it in this event. Like, giving him the belt for a tournament, like, he can't defend it.
No, not really. That's true, but...
and it feels weird. Like, apparently, what's his name? Marcus Bossett, the belt was apparently his idea. He at least claims it. And I've never heard any other stories about it to that effect, that he went up to Art Davie after UFC 4 and said, you know what you need? You need a belt. To give these guys so they can be world champion. And I got some designs, and that early belt looked like it was drawn on a cocktail napkin, so...
yeah, it's still pretty good. I don't know, I like the belt. I just like belts in general, though.
Yeah.
I would totally wear it every day if I had that belt.
Oh, of course. No, if I ever won any championship belt in anything, I would wear it every day of my life.
And that's why we can never, ever make fun of Tim Sylvia for doing that.
No, God. Of all the things I could make fun of Tim Sylvia for, wearing the belt around is not one of them.
Yeah, so that sums up right there UFC 5, Return of the Beast. And, here's a little fun factoid. The buy rate for this event, 260,000. So we are up.
Yeah.
Big time up from the last event. And, it's still not the most ever. UFC 2 at this point still had the highest buy rate with 300,000, but this is pretty close. So, they're getting back on track, and that's because, again, really the Superfight is what sold it.
Yep.
Built purely around the hype of this Ken Shamrock Royce Gracie rematch. That's what really sold the fight, and unfortunately, 260,000 fans were really disappointed.
Yeah, no kidding. What a big audience to piss all over.
Yeah, and I mean, let's do a quick breakdown of the whole show. Let's give our final thoughts on the show. I got to say, UFC 5, I didn't really remember much of it except the super fight being long and Severn winning. And that's it really sucked.
The only things I would take away from it is the entrance of Oleg Taktarov as one of the sort of forgotten fun notes of MMA. Because, like, Taktarov, he didn't ever accomplish a lot. I mean, he didn't have a great record. He did have success in the UFC, but it's not like he was one of these all-time greats who fought for years. And, it's not Fedor out there.
No, but he's really our first major Russian to hit the scene, and he made a big impact on it.
Yeah, so he has a place in history, and this was really this is sort of the intro of Oleg Taktarov. It's the introduction to ground and pound, and it's seeing Dan Severn win the tournament. That's really
it.
That's really it.
Not much to say. It was. If I had to rank compared to other UFCs, I would not give it a really high grade at all. It wasn't not good. Just a lot of big, tough guys. Didn't really know much of anything. The fights were just really. They weren't horrible because at least they were finishes, but that was pretty much it. They were finishes. That's how I see it. They were just finishes to matches.
Easily the worst UFC so far.
Yeah, I guess I could agree. I have to think back on some of the fights, but to be fair, I guess I could see it. I mean, it was entertaining at the very least, but for the wrong reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of weird shit going on that... like we say, it's a totally nude steakhouse. There's John Hess and SAFTA. There's Master John Dowdy. There's a lot of weird stuff going on. But that's not what you really like. That's not what you want your MMA event to be known for.
No. And it should be noted too that again we're referencing Inside the Lines done by Ken Shamrock by Ken Shamrock. And he mentions that there were attempts to try and get another rematch essentially the rubber match between Ken and Royce. But then Royce's people demanded Ken cut weight, and what do they say here? I believe they wanted him to cut down to 175, and Ken was not going to do that, pretty much.
No, I mean he looked like he was 270 pounds there. I mean it's probably like 240 or something, but he was gigantic at this event.
He was massive, and it should also be noted that along with this draw between the two guys, this is also the last UFC that had Gracie support behind it. At this point, Horian has left it, and this is the last time we're going to see Royce compete in the cage until UFC 60.
Oh, God.
I hope we get to those events. That's going to be a long time from now, but yeah. There's a number of reasons, or rather, reasons that have been speculated as to why Horian and the Gracie family pulled out of their support for the UFC at this point. Some people say it was just that Horian was not really happy with the direction the company was going in. He wanted it to be more Vale Tudo, less rules. Others say it's because the competition was getting tougher and Royce was having a harder time winning. So
yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, you can see it watching it.
Even for UFC 3, he was starting to struggle.
Yeah, he started struggling UFC 3. He just nosed by Dan Severn in 4, and then he totally failed to beat Ken Shamrock.
It makes you wonder too, like why didn't they send in Hickson or someone else to come in there and defend the Gracie name?
I gotta think that. Well, we know that Royce has no lack of ego, so maybe at this point he was enough of the product that he was the name at that point, and you didn't want to take that out.
Oh, I mean, but it's probably Horian that was the decision maker in I think the family at that point. So I mean, Horian could have just said, "Hey, Royce, go to Japan for a while, and you be, the new Hickson over there. I'll have Hickson to come over here and do some stuff in the UFC and bring our honor back essentially." Because Royce, being as small as he was too, he did the best he could. But once the fighters were getting more skilled and as well bigger and skilled, Royce had a lot of trouble.
And I mean that made too. Yeah, because I mean this was sort of the end of Royce for a few years too. Did he take another fight after this before he retired?
No, Royce did some more jiu-jitsu fights. He had a loss to Walid Ismail.
That's a classic. And that was sort of like that was in 1998. I mean that was 3 years after this.
3 years after this, and that was not MMA. That was a jiu-jitsu match. We didn't really see Royce again until Pride, I believe.
Yeah. So,
and that was a whole other fun story with Pride rules, where Royce got to make his own rules. And yeah, we'll get to that one day. I have a feeling, to be honest, that this whole if the fight goes to distance to draw, that had to have been a Gracie family rule. There's no way that couldn't have been.
Yeah, I got to think that was definitely. Well, I mean, there were other rules. I mean, there were the reasons, but I mean, they just brought that back from Metamoris.
That's true. It's true they did, Metamoris. And that worked out so well, too.
Well, I mean, they didn't. They took it away for the most recent one, but they brought it back again. That now it will be, because it was points for the last one. You could actually, they had judges, but now they're taking it back to a draw because the judges didn't work either.
Which just makes no sense because judges should, in theory, make this whole thing work out,
Well, I mean, I think they thought that they felt, and it could be true, that the judges just gave fighters who weren't interested in finding a submission, gave them an out to as long as I control position, I'll get a win at the end. But.
And then there's Brendan Schaub.
Oh God.
And we don't have to hear that name for many, many, many years from now.
It's too bad he's fighting Matt Mitrione. I really want to root for somebody,
All right, now we're getting way off topic.
Anyway, yeah. Way off topic.
Let's do our final wrap, I guess, of what went on here at UFC 5. So yeah, UFC 5, it was. I feel bad calling it the worst show that we've seen so far, but I guess it really, in all fairness, was.
It is. I mean, UFC 1 was awesome. UFC 2 was awesome. UFC 3 was fun. UFC 4 was good and important historically. This was historically important, but no fun whatsoever.
Yeah, it was just a lot of dull finishes. That's really how the best way to describe it. Just there's finishes, but that's it, and who cares? There's finishes over guys who didn't really take much to finish. I mean, my notes usually are paragraphs for all these fights when stuff's actually happening. These fights, takedown, submission, and that's it. UFC 5. That's pretty much it. I mean, there's not much else to say about it.
Yeah. Until next time. I got nothing.
We had a preview at first. We had a preview what's happening next because there's one more UFC still. I mean, at the very least, there's still more UFCs.
Okay. Yeah, we can talk about the next one.
That's right.
Next, So UFC 6, we got to preview that. We're done with the Gracie era, and
We're in the tough man era now, really. Now the
yeah,
Gracie's gone, a lot of the finesse and technique it's kind of going out the window for a while.
yeah, it's kind of got out in the window for a while, which is funny because I just heard. I don't know if you saw a thing just the other day, but Jeremy Horn was saying that the MMA is getting less technical.
Yeah.
Anyway, technique goes out the window. We get some of my favorite fighters of all time for no particular reason coming in here. I can't back up, but we get the polar bear, and I am a huge mark for the polar bear.
Oh yeah, no, UFC 6 is very star-studded in a lot of ways. There's a lot of big guys who are going to be making their debuts at UFC 6. A lot of big fighters making their returns. I guess we should say a few goodbyes also to a few of the fighters here at UFC 5.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, a lot of the guys do come back, though. We will see more, of course. So.
Yeah, they're starting to get we found everyone. We need everyone we can that will willingly fight for us again. So not too many people go away. Grandmaster John Dowdy took his Hapkido elsewhere, and Asbel Cancio does not make another Ving Sun appearance. Same with Ernie Verdicia, and Andy Anderson will not be seen for the last time, but that was the only time we're going to see him fight in the UFC.
Same with John Hess, too. He's not going to be in the UFC again, but he will be continuing in MMA.
Yeah. And other than that, I believe everybody else gets another round.
With the exception of Royce and Ron Jeremy.
Royce and Ron Jeremy, that's right.
Royce, like I said, as you mentioned, we won't see Royce again for a very long time, so we're just going to say goodbye for a pretty long time.
And if you want to see more of Ron Jeremy, there are any of 100 videos that you can rent at any time.
I would put some links to some websites on the bottom of our video, but I don't know if I want to get in trouble like that on Bloody Elbow, so I'll probably hold off on that.
All right, yeah. Maybe we can bury them somewhere. Yeah, just fill the comment section with photos.
Please don't. Please don't. So, all right, everybody. So that's UFC 5. That's our old school MMA review of UFC 5. Not one of the best events, but we did see the beginning of Dan Severn as the big guy. And we're going to see Dan Severn again at the next one, where there's going to be a second shot at that Superfight title, where we're going to see Ken Shamrock returning once more, take on Dan Severn to crown an actual champion, hopefully, in the Superfight division, as well as another 8-man tournament that's going to be pretty filled up with a lot of big dudes that, again, are not skilled, but they're much better than what we saw this time around.
Yeah, they got a much better cast of guys for UFC 5 or for UFC 6 than they had for UFC 5. UFC 6 is in general hell of a lot of fun. Really, everything that UFC 5 wasn't.
Yeah, so you guys can definitely look forward to UFC 6 coming up very soon. And hopefully we fixed all the audio issues that we had in the last few reviews. So let us know if this is better for you guys, if it's not too freaking bad. But hopefully this works out for you guys.
Yes. Until next time.
We got nothing. That was in sync. That was kind of cool.
Yeah.